The sun was still a pale smear behind the acacia line when the first patrol of the day slipped out of the ranger station. The Matobo Wildlife Reserve had been carved out of the raw, rolling hills years ago, not because the land was easy to manage, but because its ecosystem, dry riverbeds, copias, and sparse woodland, held a fragile thread of life that shouldn't be broken. Among that life were the last migratory herds of the region's endangered elephants, and a leopard known to a few scouts as Suri, the silent one. Suri's territory overlapped the corridor the elephants used during the early dry season, a quirk of geography that had made her both a myth and a measured concern. Predators and giants rarely shared space without tension, yet over seasons an unspoken truce had settled. Each understood the limits. Lieutenant Kavi Ndlovu, the senior ranger, rode low in the dune buggy, his face shaded by the brim of a cap streaked with dust. Beside him sat Dr. Amara Sissoko, a conservation biologist with the International Wildlife Trust, her notebook already open, pen poised to catch anomalies. Behind, in a second vehicle, two young rangers, Juma and Layla, watched the terrain, their eyes trained to see the subtle differences that betrayed movement. A broken twig, a feather caught on barbed wire, the ghost of a track. The elephants had skirted the reserve's northern ridge days earlier. Satellite collars had shown their slow drift southward. Kavi hoped today's sweep would be a quiet one. No snares, no signs of illegal incursions. Quietness, however, in places like Matobo, was always the prelude to something the unwary could miss. They were halfway through the patrol when Juma, who had been scanning the shade line of a dry gully, tensed. He pointed with a gloved hand, whispering, "Sir, over there. That rock outcrop. Look at that." Suri perched on a narrow ledge above a seasonal water run. The leopard sat immobile. Her coat, dappled in morning light, was the color of dry leaves. Her body was a tension of sinew. But what hooked Juma's gaze wasn't the animal itself. It was the stare. Suri's amber eyes were fixed, unblinking, and aimed downward at a patch of scrub a few dozen meters below. Her tail twitched once, twice, the only movement in an otherwise absolute stillness. Leopards were predators. Her stare usually meant focus on prey or resource. Today it was something else. The air around her felt charged, as if the circuit between predator instinct and something odd below had sparked. Kavi eased the vehicle off the track, cutting engine noise and signaling the others to dismount quietly. Dr. Amara hesitated, her trained mind wanting to catalog the behavior. "She's not hunting," Amara murmured. "That look, it's discomfort, or warning." Layla, who had tracked Suri's patterns before, added softly, "She's not here for the elephants either. They'd be lower, moving. That gaze is anchored on something man-made." They approached on foot, fans of silent movement spreading. Suri stayed in place. The leopard did not flee. Instead, she descended a few paces, repositioned herself so that her stare could dig deeper into the brush, then returned her gaze to the same place. That single, silent insistence acted like a compass needle, pulling their attention along a vector. Below, half concealed by a tangle of thorn and the dust of recent disturbance, was an anomaly. A shallow pit lined with fresh earth, its lip camouflaged with branches and leaves, and over that, strung in a crude but deliberate web, a heavy-duty net woven with wire and hidden snares, designed not for small game but to funnel, immobilize, and trap. The ropes led toward a set of drag marks that disappeared into the shrub. Something freighted had been pulled and then abandoned. Nearby, half buried under loose soil and disguised with mud, lay a collapsible, reinforced box, trapped in a tension system. An infant elephant's size could have been slotted in and held by a mechanism that braced under weight. "I've heard of poachers trying to capture calves for illegal live trade," Amara whispered, voice low. "But this is a trap for the larger ones, too." They were setting up a capture system. The net would tighten if something heavy stepped in, and the box— She didn't have to finish. The mechanism would hold a calf immobilized, while the poachers moved in with sedation, or worse, use it as bait to draw in the rest of the herd. Suri's stare never wavered. The leopard, so often invisible, had chosen presence. Her body a warning flag, her eyes a message. Juma crouched and traced the drag marks with a twig. They led toward a narrow ravine, where fresh tire impressions disappeared into the scrub. Recent and not subtle. Kavi's face tightened. They were here last night, maybe early this morning. This was bait. If the herd had moved a little faster, a calf would have been caught. The adults would have come back. They'd have been vulnerable, confused. The leopard stood, stepped down just enough to let them see her frame in silhouette, then turned and melted back into the patchy shade, as if acknowledging the disturbance had been noted. Her silence had spoken. Kavi radioed in the find. Command, this is Ndlovu. Possible illegal capture device, calf trap, located on southern corridor. Immediate intervention required. Marking coordinates, team staying to secure area. While waiting for the secondary unit, they began dismantling the visible parts of the setup with surgical care, documenting, photographing, and easing the netting in a way that left no chance for the mechanism to trigger accidentally. The plan had a scar. The poachers had not yet arrived, but tracks near the pit showed that they were still within the region, perhaps observing, perhaps regrouping. Above them, on a distant copy, Suri watched from a fold of broken stone. Her eyes followed the ranger's steady hands. Her stare had carried the warning. Now she retreated, leaving human hands to act. The elephants, live and unaware farther down in the scrub, grazed quietly, their massive shapes moving like slow hills. The silent pact held, for now, between the watcher of shadow and the keepers of the herd. By midday, the reserve's rapid response team had arrived, bringing mobile gear, a small drone for perimeter scouting, and a tactical decision to widen the net, figuratively and literally. Kavi convened the core group under a sparse tree. Amara, Juma, Layla, and a tactical liaison from the anti-poaching unit named Hassan, a man whose childlike softness and speech contradicted the steel behind his eyes. The trap was a part of a larger picture. The tire tracks, the timing, the sophistication of the mechanism. It suggested a crew with resources, someone who had studied elephant movement, and adapted a plan to catch the young without alerting the adults until it was too late. Hassan unfolded a satellite map. They didn't just want ivory, he said. A calf alive brings higher ransom. Zoos, private collectors, even rogue handlers across borders. If they'd taken one, they'd have signals to pull the rest. We need more than reaction. We need to find their vantage, their supply line, and intercept before they relocate or bring sedation. The leopard's role, they decided, had to evolve from coincidence into guidance. Suri's pattern of positioning was not random. An experienced tracker, Hassan opined, might read her routine as markers of disturbance beyond just the initial trap. They seated a quiet observer team, 2 rangers with binoculars and radio silence orders, near the waterfall ridge that framed the corridor. They watched the leopard from a respectful distance, treating her like a living sensor. Suri, unbothered by observers, walked with slow purpose across a ridge further east, pausing at a certain acacia tree, and then sitting down, facing the old dry riverbed. Her stare cut across the dry bed and rested on a line of disturbed grass that didn't align with animal pathways. She stood, walked over, and dropped into the shadow, cataloging the same angle Hassan's instincts had flagged. Something else lay hidden. Layla whispered, "She's looking again." Kavi nodded, and they advanced, quietly this time, with the leopard's gaze guiding their steps. Beneath brittle grass was a concealed cache, a small bivouac hastily set up, camouflaged with branches containing faded but recent supplies. Sedative darts, ropes, handheld radios, a bundle of cloth with oil stains used as scent masking, and a map with markings of the waterholes and the planned paths for elephant movement. A crude schematic of the trap had been sketched with additional nodes, future capture points. Whoever had been here was planning to expand, likely with the crew coming back in the evening to set more bait along the herd's path. The discovery flipped their operation from salvage to preemption. Hassan sent 2 rangers to shadow the closest suspected footpath, while Kavi and Amara moved to establish a soft perimeter around the original trap for surveillance. Juma and Layla, with whispered orders, carried tamper-resistant tags to seed false signals. Fake blood, dummy footprints, designed to string along the poachers' expectations while they laid in wait for the crew's return. The plan was to use the Leopard's silent signals as an early alarm, rather than just a one-time clue. If Suri returned near those spots or shifted her gaze, it would likely mean the poachers had come back close enough. They waited through the heat of the day. Locals brought water, and the elephants, unbothered, grazed farther off, their ears swatting away flies, trunks probing for roots. The pattern felt fragile until dusk's first purple seeped into the sky. Then movement. A figure, shadowed in scrub, creeping along the path flagged earlier. Another joined, two, then a third. They carried empty slings and concealed packs, the kind who thought the cover of gathering dusk could hide intent. Hassan signaled. The poachers' plan to return to the cache and set additional traps was about to meet the reserve's counter. The team split with tactical precision. One group shadowed and fed non-lethal interference to delay, while another, guided by the faint flicker of a small handheld torch, moved toward their expected staging point. Suri, appearing from the ridge in the pale last light, sat down again, this time closer, and fixed her stare not on the old trap, but on the advancing figures. Her presence became a proxy tension. Poachers were superstitious in the field. A leopard's sudden, unblinking appearance, staring directly at them from a conspicuous place, made even seasoned men hesitate. They froze, whispering among themselves, uncertainty thickening their breath. The momentary pause gave Hassan's team the edge. Two of the poachers separated to approach the cache. Layla, concealed behind a thicket, radioed Hassan in prearranged flickers. The anti-poaching team moved in, quick, coordinated, and non-lethal where possible. When the confrontation came, it was not a gunfight. The poachers, startled by movement and the inexplicable feeling that they'd been watched long before the rangers revealed themselves, surrendered with little resistance. One, younger than the others, had a tear streaked across his face. Not from pain, but from the realization their operation had already been seen. Hassan collected their radios, sedative devices, and the map. The head of the crew, a grizzled man with a scar across his cheek, tried to bargain under breath, only to be told coldly, "You drew your map in the wrong place. The Watcher saw before you could act." The leopard watched from the shadow of a mopane tree. Her eyes adjusted to the small camp's collapse. She did not approach, did not interfere. Her stare had done more than point. It had shaped the timing, delivered a second signal, and, by simply being, unsettled the criminals enough to give their prey a chance at survival. The arrest of the poachers triggered a ripple beyond the immediate relief. The detainees were transported under guard to the regional outpost, where investigators began piecing together their network, buyers, handlers, and the routes through which live calves might have been trafficked. But the immediate imperative remained. The elephant herd still moved along the corridor, unaware of how close they'd come to being scattered, captured, and sold. The original trap had to be neutralized permanently, and the potential capture points marked on the poacher's map had to be rendered useless. Using the seized schematic, Kavi led a team to each future node at first light. They repaired earth disturbances to erase signs, repositioned scent markers to confuse tracking dogs, and installed decoy bait mimicking the original trap's visual cues, an inversion of the poacher's design meant to waste any attempt at reuse. Dr. Amara oversaw a process of elephant safety conditioning, where she and her team introduced low-level sound cues and non-invasive stimuli near the repaired areas, so that the herd would associate the zone with caution, steering their movement away from the now-known danger geometry. The poacher's camp, now fully processed, yielded more troubling insight. There were accomplices farther out, who would likely adapt and return with new traps. Hassan recommended a rolling surveillance ring, mobile ranger units making unpredictable sweeps, local community scouts given small stipends to report unusual movement, and the deployment of quiet camera traps in the leopard's key observation points, capturing both Suri's patterns and anyone else who might use her presence as a marker. Suri's silent routes were logged. The times she appeared at certain intersections were compared with past data to see if she had detected other disturbances previously unreported. That review yielded new contacts, a series of snares for smaller game the team had removed in prior seasons, where Suri had also appeared unusually, now understood as tentative early warnings that had been ignored. The biggest test came when the herd moved close to a reed-swamped pool, flagged on the Poachers schematic as a potential forced bottleneck. The team had prearranged safe observers and had installed quiet beacons that could emit low-frequency pulses, enough to create a subtle irritation in the ground to redirect without spooking. Suri appeared again, sitting just above the pool, her stare sweeping past the water and into the scrub beyond. Her attention shifted, tautened, and then she walked slightly, pausing where a previously unseen set of camouflaged bindings, intended to be a new capture line, had been strung. The team severed it, marking it in the log. The elephants passed by, slow, browsed, and moved on. One of the calves raised its trunk and let out a low rumble, the kind that rippled confidence through the herd. The silent watcher in the shadows beyond inclined her head subtly, then disappeared. In the aftermath, when the story of the operation spread, the phrase "the Leopard stare-freed elephants" began to appear in internal reports, not as a mystical flourish, but as shorthand for the series of human decisions triggered by animal behavior. The network of informants expanded. Community elders relayed how, in the past, Suri had sometimes appeared before droughts, before wildfire edges ignited, and, now seen in the light of this rescue, before illegal incursions. The reserve's leadership established a formal wildlife sentinel liaison, a small team whose job was to translate atypical animal behavior into actionable scouting intel. Suri herself was never approached. She remained sovereign, a ghost of muscle and gaze who had no need for reward. Months later, the rivers ran thinner from another early dry season, but the elephants moved with an ease that hinted at confidence rather than dread. The corridor had been reinforced not with fences and walls, but with a deeper weave: community engagement, intelligence from trackers, and the respectful attention to what the landscape whispered, oftentimes through the eyes of a predator. The herd's matriarch, a massive female with a notched ear from an old conflict, still carried a faint scar from a near miss the previous year, but her calves were growing in the shade of improved security. At the base, under the same acacia, where they had once convened in haste, a modest plaque had been installed, weathered wood with carved lettering, "To the Silent Watcher." Her gaze broke the trap. Her presence changed the course. Respect the wild that warns. Matobo Reserve, 2025, Dr. Amar had placed a small camera in a crevice where Suri often sat, its lens concealed, its purpose twofold: to record her movements, to better understand patterns, and to serve as a non-intrusive tribute. Images from that feed would sometimes be printed and given to the ranger families, reminders that survival was shared, not owned. In the early morning, when mist curled low over the grass, the watch team would see Suri's silhouette on a distant ridge, her eyes catching the light, unwavering. The leopard's stare had become a benchmark in training. New rangers were told the story, not as myth, but as a case study in listening. The captured poachers were tried. The network was dismantled in part because of evidence pulled from their maps, their intercepted communications, and the timing of the ranger interdiction. The reward for their capture came in the form of increased funding to expand the mobile units and to seed further training in behavioral triangulation, the practice of using animal behavior signals corroborated with human intelligence. On a quiet afternoon, the herd passed near the old trap site again. They paused briefly where the camouflaged nest had been, the calves' trunks reaching to feel the repaired earth. Suri watched from the shadow of a distant kopje. The matriarch lifted her trunk, sniffed the wind, and then signaled the herd to move on. There was no ceremony, only continuation, life winding forward through the thin, guarded seam of the savanna. The reserve had changed. It was not because of a single leopard's eyes, but because those eyes had been seen, respected, interpreted, and acted upon. The silent stare had initiated a series of choices, human, procedural, tactical, that wove a net not for capture, but for protection. And somewhere on the ridge, Suri sat, looking out over the corridor she had once marked, her gaze as quiet as ever, her presence still translating into life below.